If memory serves, a while back Elon had said nobody had died while using FSD. Well, that record almost changed yesterday when FSD tried to kill my son and I. In this video, I'm going to look at it, analyze it a bit, give you some of my thoughts, and why I've decided to put FSD on the back burner for a while. Well, first, let's look at what happened. We were going down the road. Unfortunately, I had turned the camera off about 2 minutes earlier. We were going through the roundabout challenge that we had done before, and we had finished it. If anybody's interested, it did just as poorly or worse than it did on the previous version of FSD. But anyway, we were coming back from that, and we were just going down a straight highway, and this car decides it's going to make a right turn, so it pulls off. It's clear that it's not an issue. But when we get almost to being that car, something about FSD saw it as a threat, and it jerked us hard to the left into incoming traffic. Realize that the speed limit on this road is 50 miles an hour, and everybody usually goes over 5 miles over that. So we're approaching that oncoming traffic at 110 miles an hour, and we suddenly jerk into it. Now, if you look slowly, I went back and looked at it frame by frame and tried to judge when the jerk actually occurred, and it looks like it happened right here. So it's possible we may not have had a direct head-on, but I'm pretty sure we would have at least had a partial head-on where our left quarter hit their left quarter. That would have caused an accident. We have a double-decker gravel truck coming up on us from the opposite side. Human reaction time's about 1.5 seconds, which would have put it right here after the accident. And since it takes about 2 football fields for a truck like that to stop at that speed, it clearly would have plowed into us as well. The incident shook both me and my son to our core. This was not a, oh, what a stupid thing FSD did. This was a, oh my God, it tried to kill us moment. So what do I think happened? Well, as is often the case with FSD, it's hard to know. We've had other situations. If you watched my 2-week review of FSD, you'll see there were situations where I can't even begin to guess at what it's thinking, where it has a clear directive to make a right turn and it's all over the map. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have the camera video to look at, so we don't know what the display was showing, and that might have given us some clues about what it was seeing. But I do have some ideas. Again, from my 2-week review video of FSD, you may recall I mentioned something in there about snappy cars. And it's where oncoming traffic appears to, on the display, appears to drive in the ditch, and then when it gets a beam, the repeater cameras on the side, it snaps back into place. I'm wondering if FSD noticed something on the right, perhaps, and I haven't looked at our videos to see if you get snappy cars for cars on the right, but perhaps it had the snappy car and the car was snapping back to where it should have been, and it took that as movement of that other car and decided to avoid it. And it thought it had room because on the left side, the snappy car was portrayed as being in the ditch, that there was much more room there than there actually was. I have no idea if this is what caused it or not, but it's a thought. In any case, it saw something on the right it didn't like and decided the best option was to throw us headlong into oncoming traffic coming at us at 110 miles an hour. There's so much wrong with that, I don't know where to begin. Eventually, they're going to have to make smart decisions, like if there's a 50% chance of hitting that lady pushing the stroller, is it better to have a 100% chance and crash into the lamppost over there? I'm glad I'm not part of the decision-making team for those decisions, but they're going to have to be made. In this case, you think there would be some sort of directive of, if you're going to take action, make sure you don't make the situation worse. Even if something was happening on the right side, it was clearly the correct move to let that happen rather than to throw us into the face of oncoming traffic. When making these videos, I don't like to just point out things that are wrong. I like to make suggestions on how they might be made right. And to do that in this video, we kind of have to talk about Elon's moral imperative.
And sometimes there's this dichotomy of, should you wait until the car is like, I don't know, 3 times safer than a person before deploying any technology? But I think that is actually morally wrong. At the point at which you believe that that adding autonomy reduces injury and death, I think you have a moral obligation to deploy it.
Elon, of course, is 100% right when he says that if it's safer to use FSD than to not use FSD, even in its current form, where it's clearly less capable than a human, then there's a moral imperative that you release that to the public. If you can reduce accidents and deaths by releasing an improper product combined with extra diligence, if that results in better safety scores, then you have a moral imperative. The problem becomes, is that really the case? The stats that Tesla has been releasing to us were just for autopilot. And their stats show that it's much safer to use autopilot than to not use autopilot. But autopilot at that time was mostly used on freeways. And also, if FSD was included in that, it wasn't broken out, so we don't know what the FSD stats were. Elon hinted on AI Day that they were actually better than autopilots. But you may be comparing apples and oranges. Realize that at the time, and until very recently, the only people who had FSD were the cream of the crop drivers with very high safety scores. So there's a possibility that when he's looking at the accident data, he's not comparing apples and apples. If you have the cream of the crop drivers using FSD, are they safer using FSD than they would be if they were not? Not the general populace, but those cream of the crop drivers. And if that is the case, then you clearly have a moral imperative to get that out there. Realize, of course, that the safety score improvements that they're seeing aren't just a result of how well FSD is performing. It's a result of how well FSD is performing combined with the extra vigilance that the driver brings when he's using FSD. And those two together result in a better safety score. I was actually going to make another video called, ironically, FSD will try to kill you, but that's great. And in that case, I meant kill in the figurative sense, because it had never really, it had done things that would have dinged fenders and caused accidents if I hadn't caught it, but it had never tried to throw me into oncoming traffic before. The point of that video was going to be that I was concerned there was going to be a complacency period where FSD got so good that we weren't being as vigilant as we should, and then accidents would start to happen. And the whole point of that video was going to be, we need to stay super vigilant even when this thing is near perfect. FSD is nowhere near what a human is at this point, and definitely won't be by the end of the year. Anybody who's used it knows that. I should mention that Elon's timelines don't bother me at all. It's one thing to make a better MySpace, or to realize online shopping's the future and to grab the market and hold on to it. Those are very notable accomplishments. It's quite another thing entirely to walk into 2 very established industries and not shake them up a bit, but totally revolutionize them, as he's done with the automotive and the rocket industries. It's hard to overestimate how much esteem I have for Elon in those arenas. And I think to be a visionary like Elon, you have to be overly optimistic. So when he says something's going to be done in 6 months and it takes 2 years, that really doesn't bother me at all. I think it's almost a mandatory trait that you be overly optimistic when you're a visionary. And Elon is clearly a visionary. So my suggestions to Tesla, for what they're worth, depend on whether the stats really are better when people are using FSD than they're not. And I'm talking about the same drivers with the same safety scores. Would they be safer if they were driving themselves or using FSD with the extra vigilance that they bring to it? If the stats are better, then Elon's absolutely right. There's a moral imperative that this be out there. But that doesn't mean it can't be handled better. Obviously, you have to do tasks in parallel, but I would put by far the highest priority on making sure that vector space is accurately representing the real world. It goes back to the primary software axiom, garbage in, garbage out. If the computer doesn't know exactly where the objects are, it can't make proper decisions. This should be the number one priority by far, and I suspect it is. But there, like the snappy car thing we discussed earlier, there's no excuse for that. That should be gone by now. My second suggestion is it looks like they'll soon have the computing power, if they don't already, to take every intervention and throw it into a simulation and determine the severity of the harm that would have been caused had it allowed to proceed, had the person not intervened. And then prioritize those things. Why in the world are you worrying about whether that car is parked or waiting for a stop sign when you have issues where it's trying to throw cars into oncoming traffic? These things need to be prioritized by severity. In addition, and I can't help but think this is already in there, but there needs to be some sort of don't make the situation worse. When the computer decides on a course of action, it needs to do a check to say, hey, am I going to be making things worse by taking this action? That definitely wasn't applied here. And I don't know if the computer was overloaded, task saturated. It seemed to be behind the power curve to me, but that could just be perception. Who knows what it's really thinking? It may be entirely possible that without great software efficiency gains or hardware 4, they just may not be able to do FSD. I have no idea. And if it turns out we've been comparing apples to oranges, and when we look at apples to apples, we see that it's actually safer for these high-performing drivers to not use FSD at this point, then FSD should be paused. Every intervention should be mapped into the simulator, and AI should be let loose on it until it can figure out how to handle every single one of them. And then at that point, it should be unpaused and released to the public again, and new data collected if necessary. This is just my idiot layman's interpretation. I don't understand half of the release notes that are released by these guys. I don't have a clue at the difficulty of this task. But from a macro overview from somebody on the outside, these are my impressions. And to those of you who would use this to spread FUD, pull your heads out. This technology is amazing. It's going to save millions of lives. If the stats are right and they're comparing apples to apples, then Elon's progressing down the only moral path by releasing this to as wide of the public as he can. And as we all know with AI, the more data you got, the faster you're going to get to the end. This is an amazing, life-saving technology. So what I think I'm going to do is I'll just use cruise control. Maybe auto steer on the freeway when I don't have oncoming traffic. I'll wait for new versions to come out. I'll give them a shot, see how much better they are. And eventually this thing is going to be amazing. But until that point, I don't think I'm safer using it, even with the extra vigilance I bring to it. And I can't let my fascination with the technology override my family's safety. One final note before I go. It's possible we lucked out. Because autopilot in the past has often been late to brake and slammed on the brakes, when I saw that car moving right, I had moved my hands up and had gripped the wheel. And it's possible that just the tension of my grip disengaged FSD when it tried to turn into oncoming traffic, long before I could have reacted myself. I don't know if that was the case. It's possible I reacted and just was able to catch it in time. But in any case, I'd just like to encourage you FSD users out there, be careful. Don't become complacent. Keep your hands on the wheel. You know all this, but it can't hurt to be reminded. We're going to get there. Let's get there safe.